Hey.
Hello, hello, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. I am joined tonight, as always, by my wonderful co-host, retired homicide lieutenant Brian Sanders. How you doing?
I'm good. I just noticed my shirt's a little stretched out.
I
Sorry
think you were
about
just
that.
like pulling on it, right?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Looks like I have sideburns. Anyway, hey guys, welcome back. Happy Tuesday. So we started. I was already in the comments a little bit telling people nobody cares about what we have going on, but we had baseball tonight, so we're getting started a little later than our normal show. And that's actually why we didn't come to you guys last week. So it's kind of this is a busy season, but we're trying to be as weekly as possible. So welcome back, you guys. If you are new here, this is a true crime podcast. So I think you know what you're signing up for there. That said, this is a live YouTube show. We air every Tuesday on the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button. Not really a big deal. It'd be cool.
That is a good idea.
That's a great idea.
And that thumbs up thing.
Yeah, I always forget about that.
Hey, and those stars on Spotify.
Yep.
I think 5. And Apple review.
Yep.
While we're asking for stuff.
All those things. And then after we air live on YouTube, we do drop to any streaming platform wherever you listen to your podcast. So your iTunes, your Spotify, all that good stuff. So here we are. And we don't usually do like an off week between a two-parter. And it just so happened that was the case. But I hope that gave people time to catch up on part 1 if you didn't watch it live. So we are coming back with part 2. And I would say the most... what would I say? Like most the meatiest portion of the show. Okay, we kind of laid out the scene last week of kind of what was going on, who Tom Brown was. I'll give you the quickest recap here in a moment, but tonight's show gives you really the meat and potatoes, if you will, of the case. And if you follow me on Instagram on the Andrea Up Late Instagram channel, you might have seen that my story today, when referencing this case, I had said, why don't you see what spurred us to call the Attorney General's office in Texas, with a little bit of an irritated face I had going on about that. And so we're going to see your opinions on this. This is, again, we often cover unresolveds. I've kind of quit saying unsolved because so many are just right there that I guess technically they're unsolved, but a lot of times, sometimes we actually kind of know what happened, but it cannot be fully solved. So either way, unresolved is where we're going to go with that. And this case took place in 2016 in a town called Canadian, Texas. We probably spent too much time last time talking about the name of that city and the fact that it was named Canadian, Texas. But it was. And Canadian, Texas is like, again, when you picture the state of Texas, what some call the Panhandle region, which is like the top hat, if you will, of Texas. Canadian is up there in the northeast corner, just a few miles from the Oklahoma border. So that kind of gives you an idea a little bit about where that is. So just the quickest, update or like recap, I guess I should say. Tom Brown was an 18-year-old senior in high school at Canadian High School in Texas. He had plans to study broadcasting upon his graduation. He was the drama kid. He was the football kid. He was involved in everything. He was student body president. He was known as a jovial, happy kind of guy. He was a rules follower. His friends will corroborate that while some of them smoked pot, he didn't. He hated drugs. He would occasionally drink at some of the high school parties, but they said very minimally. He was not known to get out there and party or go down with these ragers. He had a best friend, a female named Christian, who had already graduated. She was in her freshman year of Oklahoma State at this point when Tom was a senior in high school. And so just to set the scene, it was what they consider Thanksgiving Eve, right? So it was the night before Thanksgiving, November 23rd of 2016. And three of Tom's friends he saw after they had, kind of hung out with their family a little bit, coming in town for the holiday. Then he and two or three of his friends took turns kind of riding around. Very rural town, guys. I think I wrote the population is around 3,000, just give or take a few. So very small town. And they kind of ran the roads, listened to some music at different intervals throughout the night, told each other good night, and eventually Tom got in his red Durango to drive home. That would have been the thought. He had made plans with his friends to see them the next day after Thanksgiving dinner. He made plans for even the following semester to go visit his friend at the college. So these were kind of some forethought planning going on. And when they all said goodnight that night, no one saw Tom again. So I think that we left off last show by talking about the fact that he never came home. It didn't take much after midnight for his mother to be concerned because he never actually broke curfew. He had taken her debit card with him to get like incidentals, some gas, snacks, whatever he wanted to get with her debit card. And he had taken his phone with him, wallet, keys. And so when we left off last week, we talk about this place called Lake Marvin Road, which is ultimately like a 12-mile strip of a rural, I say road, some of it is a true road, some of it's more like a service road. So like think marshy, brush, the Canadian River ran through, which was a pretty big river. And so this road ran alongside that. And when we finished off last time, we were talking about how there was some CCTV on or near the water tower there, which did show footage of Tom's truck, the Durango, at 5:56 the next morning, slowly traversing down that road. So this is sunrise. Okay, it's dark outside. So it's going down that road. The camera catches it slowly, like kind of going through what was already an open gate and eventually coming to a rest and parking under kind of a thicket of trees there. And, but it was too dark, unfortunately, to be able to see if anyone entered or exited the vehicle upon it parking. And that was it. And so we talked to you about Sheriff Nathan Lewis. He was the sheriff of the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office there. He was a 32-year-old, kind of new to the job, kind of mixed reviews amongst the town at that time, if you will. And so as he tells it, he was heavily investigating this case. And then we talk a little bit about the FBI and the Texas Rangers starting to get involved by the time we ended last show. Okay. And so that's kind of where we were. We've got another couple individuals that we're going to talk about, and it really sets this whole case aflame. This is where it all gets wild. Finger pointing starts. And we're going to see about what possibly could have happened to Tom Brown. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
You chuckling?
Sorry, no.
What you got?
Completely unrelated.
Okay, really quickly in the chats. Again, if you are new here, we generally don't engage the chats too much verbally during the case because we're kind of going through a timeline, unless it's to answer a question or something like that. But we do have friends in the chat. You are always welcome to hop on. If you go to YouTube, go to the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. And all you have to do is sign into YouTube. Again, it costs nothing. It's perfectly free. All you do is use your birth assigned email. Everyone gets one before you leave the hospital when you're born. Use your email, log in, and you can chat with us if you so choose. So we've got a lot of friends that are in the chats. And Michael Hendricks just said that Alan Jackson just played his last show. And in fact, I just saw yesterday that he has decided that his last show is going to be next summer in Nashville. And that's that.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I know. We might have to chat about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What you got? You want to speak? Do you want to speak?
No.
I've been blabbing.
No, I don't.
You sure?
Is
you
Brooks and Dunn playing that weekend too? No.
Oh, my stars.
When's that Brooks and Dunn gonna play a concert?
I don't know. You know, Arrington Vineyards is out outside of Franklin in Tennessee, and that's Kix Brooks Vineyard. Or actually, wait, is that Ronnie Dunn's? No, it's Kix Brooks's, I believe. Okay, I digress. We're going to talk about Tom Brown Part 2. Again, just a reminder, if you're new here, Brian, like I said earlier, is a retired homicide lieutenant. And so I say that because with a lot of these cases, that comes in handy, his expertise, particularly when we're talking about investigations and just kind of how things are handled. In this case, my word is no exception. Ooh-wee. You like some of the characters in this case, don't you? Okay,
usually I'm always like, oh. Sometimes, and you get you get a little frustrated. Yeah, I get a little diplomatic, but this time it starts to look just kind of cut and dry. And sometimes I think people just get over their heads, but their ego just can't help it.
Ooh.
They just gotta stay in it and keep running their mouth.
We got egos as big as a 10-gallon hat in this case.
I hate it.
Ooh, and unfortunately we have ego and we also have lack of experience, and we have those things combined, which can make it a little bit gross.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm just wondering, I don't know, there's nothing happening here. That's a little subliminal if you're watching the show. All right, so Tom Brown Part 2. So now that you're caught up, it's worth noting that Penny's thoughts immediately upon Tom's disappearance. Remember, Penny Meeks, she got remarried. Penny is Tom's mother. And so I told you that when Penny was asked what she thought could have happened to Tom, she thought maybe suicide. So her first initial reaction was suicide. She was asked why she thought that, and she said because it ran in her family. And so this is referencing the fact that her father committed suicide when Tom was a baby. It's the same year that Tom was born. When pressed about how she thought Tom could have done this, she said, the choking game. Okay, a couple of things to keep in mind, because there are people who will maybe presume that Tom could have committed suicide, and they'll hearken on this, on her father having done this, and say that was kind of like something in Tom's head or whatever. She will say that she never even really talked to Tom about her father doing that. That wasn't something she really wanted hanging over their heads. So just keep that in mind. So when she said the choking game, so keep this in mind. She was a teacher, and I will say everything that I've kind of read about Penny, interviews I've seen with her, I feel like she was not, I don't want to say she was naive. I do think that they were a bit sheltered. They were in a rural town. Just some things kind of seemed, wild or whatever. And she kind of threw this out there because she had heard about it. My goodness, over there.
Sorry about that. Grab was making a comment about.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I'm distracted like squirrel over here. So it doesn't take much to take me off track.
I'm so sorry.
But anyway, so when she said the choking game, if you're not familiar, that's just kind of a thing that has gone on where often children, teenagers will choke themselves or others to elicit kind of a feeling of euphoria, and then eventually you pass out. So when they said, well, how do you think Tom presumably could have committed suicide had that been what he did? And this is what she referenced, the choking game. Now, when you think of someone committing suicide, though, or playing the choking game, I should say, this typically wouldn't be a scenario where someone's getting in their vehicle, driving around by themselves in the middle of the night to go out to the woods to then play the choking game. That's kind of not really how this works. So it wasn't long after this that Penny changed her thoughts. She later says that she was actually just terrified. It didn't make sense that he was gone. And so that she immediately went to that scenario because she had heard of kids doing that. And she knew that Tom wasn't really a gun type of guy for her. Even so, she says that she checked and noticed that all of the guns that their family owned were in place at their home. All medications were accounted for. So when she worried that suicide could have been an option, she did kind of check through these things in their home and realized that nothing that she could have considered to have been a weapon or a mode of that had been messed with. So she just said that she knew that he had a lot on his plate. It was his senior year, and she just really didn't know what could have happened to him. Tom's teachers and friends were all spoken with upon his disappearance. They all said the same thing. Tom had been his usual good-natured, happy self leading up to his disappearance. No one really noticed anything different with his disposition, and they all agreed that he had been just really Tom. He hadn't been any different. So while trying to get a beat on who Tom Brown was, what he liked to do, what happened to him, the police in Hemphill County began asking more questions. So Nathan Lewis, that's who I just showed you here. Here's another little picture of Nathan. Nathan Lewis was the sheriff, and he very early on floats this idea that maybe Tom had left with someone Penny didn't know. So he kind of threw that idea out there early on, and it kind of stuck. So he says, I think Tom might have, left. Penny, is there any way that he could have gone with someone that you didn't know? And she's saying that doesn't even make sense. she almost immediately debunked this theory and said that, she couldn't understand why that would happen. So I'm just trying to paint a picture to where there are 3 or 4 people coming in with different ideas as to what could have happened with Tom, and that's fine in an investigation, unless you take one theory and just run with it. So pretty early on, Penny butted heads with Sheriff Nathan Lewis, and it seems like the feeling was pretty mutual, because you can go back and listen to some audio where Nathan is recorded speaking about Penny, and he flat up and out calls her a liar. Like, he has anger in his voice, and he says, "Oh, she's a liar." These are not words we usually hear when we're talking about a victim's loved one, particularly a young man's mother, when there really has been nothing else coming out to prove that Penny has lied about anything at all. So a friend of Penny's sent her the contact information of a local investigator. Okay, so Philip Klein, you're going to hear his name now throughout the rest of this show. He was the owner of Klein Investigations and Consulting. So he had an office about 100 miles away from Canadian. It was east of Houston. So I will tell you this. I'm going to have to preface a little bit about Philip Klein. He is a character, all right. I will tell you that when, so Skip Hollingsworth did a fantastic, I believe, 10-part series in Texas Monthly, where he interviews Tom's friends, family. He speaks with Sheriff Nathan Lewis a lot, and he speaks with Philip Klein a lot. You will learn early on that not only did Nathan Lewis seem to butt heads with Tom's mom, Penny, he also royally butts heads with Philip Klein. And when I first started listening to interviews with Philip Klein, I'll have to say, I get it. He's not an easy pill to swallow, okay? Mm-hmm. He's kind of that, like, shtick of himself, right? Like that character that is the PI. Like, you think about this guy rolling into town. He's going to tell you how good he is. He's going to tell you how successful he is. He's, loudly spoken. He's like 6'6", so he's a big presence already, and he's got a big personality, and he thinks very highly of himself. Now, some will argue that comes with corroboration, because he actually has been pretty successful in his career of investigating privately. I think that he notably was interviewed on Dateline because there was a time when Olivia Newton-John's boyfriend disappeared down to Mexico, and there was the idea of him actually just trying to basically get away. But this Philip Klein was sent down to Mexico to investigate the disappearance of Olivia Newton-John's boyfriend. I reference that because he will reference it. It's the first thing he leads with. That was, a notable case for him. So he likes to talk about that. But either way, love him or hate him, you can't really argue with some of the facts in this case and some of the rocks that he's uncovered. So when we talk about Nathan Lewis having a bit of an ego, Philip Klein just has the personality. I'm not sure that the ego is really there so much. And so, but they butted heads big time. And Nathan Lewis did not like someone coming into his town to help work on this case. But either way, early on, Penny just knew that she wanted some outside assistance that didn't involve Nathan Lewis. So that would be, that's Philip Klein. So it wasn't much of a stretch to learn that he and Nathan are butting heads. They do not have a favorable opinion of each other. In fact, they both talked about how the other one looked, which I thought was kind of funny. They were both frustrated with how the other one dressed. So Philip Klein was like, oh, he's like a GQ boy in a cowboy hat and jeans and a button-down shirt with a vest. He's got his little Hemphill County Sheriff's Office logo embroidered on the, and Nathan Lewis kind of did the same, conversely, about Klein. So Klein will say that almost immediately upon the first meeting he had with Nathan Lewis, that the sheriff already had in mind what happened to Tom. We can call this tunnel vision, okay? So Klein says that Nathan Lewis said, quote, "I think he's gay. I think he has a fetish of wearing adult diapers." I said what I said. Okay, we're going to come back to that. Klein says that for half an hour, Nathan Lewis painted a picture of Tom running away from the life he knew in Canadian. Now, this later, Nathan Lewis will say, "I didn't say he was gay. I didn't say these things." But then there's going to be things that Penny says that Nathan Lewis said, and Nathan Lewis comes back to say, "I never said those things." There are going to be things that one of Tom's friend's parents says that Nathan Lewis said, and Nathan Lewis will come back to say, "Oh, I never said those things." So it does seem to be that Nathan Lewis says what he wants to say when he says it. But if it's not written down or recorded, he just will say that he did not say those things. I do believe he said these things because we already know that he's painting a picture to Penny that Tom just ran off with someone. And we're going to see that common theme, but we really have nothing to corroborate that that's what happened. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what you got?
No, I was just saying, that's kind of the mark of a inexperienced or ill-disciplined detective, is to start telling family or other people what's going on in the investigation until you're completely done and you know things that you can prove and things you can't. So like that old saying, you're going to paint yourself into a corner, in that sense that you're going to put information out there that you haven't fully vetted.
Yeah.
And then when you do try to explain it, or you can't prove it one way or another, or it just harms someone's image when it's not necessary.
Yeah.
That whole thing about the fetish about diapers, that may not be necessary to be told or mentioned or put out there, whether someone is found during a missing person or whether the decedent's recovered and then it becomes a death investigation.
Right.
If it has nothing to do with the investigation, it doesn't need to be talked about or left that office.
Right. And so Penny will say, and I think a couple other people throughout this case, that they did feel like, and Nathan Lewis actually says, I believe I played a little clip of the audio before, but how he talks about putting someone under a microscope. And the way he says, like, oh, I hate to do it, but that's what you have to do to learn about your victim. He's not actually talking about victimology, it doesn't sound. I mean, I think the connotation for putting someone under a microscope, it kind of comes back with a negative one, right? It doesn't mean like I really want to get to know him. It kind of comes back not sounding so favorable. So either way, back to the diaper thing. So, and I'm briefly going to touch on it just because it's everywhere, because I think people like to talk about it because it sounds salacious and wild and it's kind of everywhere. Tom Brown's case is not actually talked about a whole lot, but wherever you find that it is, you will see something about this diaper wearing business. So Sage Pennington was Tom Brown's ex-girlfriend. All right. We talked about this last episode. They broke up the year, or actually just within months prior to his disappearance. Everyone around them corroborated that it was very amicable. They were still friends. She had gone on to college. There was just some things that weren't going to work out logistically, and they were fine. But Sage Pennington talked to detectives and mentioned that Tom had kind of had a fetish for wearing adult diapers. She also said that Tom felt really guilty about this. He felt strange about it. He didn't love this part of himself, but he did confide in her about this. Now, I will say, some sources will say this was debunked and that she was told by law enforcement to tell this. I can't corroborate whether or not, or, I can't get down to the bottom of that. I don't know if they actually told her to say this or if there was actually truth to this. My point is, though, the only reason I'm even talking about it is because if you're in the camp that potentially he committed suicide, you could say that, among some interviews with his mother, you can tell that she's certainly not very comfortable with the idea of homosexuality. And I would gather to say she's certainly not very comfortable with the idea of something like this type of a fetish. She doesn't come off as hateful or rude, but you can tell that probably behind closed doors, this wouldn't be a very comfortable conversation between she and Tom. So the people who do sit on the suicide side of things with Tom, would kind of point to this as potentially a reason that he was feeling isolated, depressed, not happy with himself, XYZ. But I certainly encourage you to listen to the rest of this before you come to any conclusion, because pretty soon all of this stuff seems to get washed out and a lot of other things matter more. But I certainly want you to understand at least what I meant when we talk about that. So like I said about if you're concerned about suicide, so Tom's brother Tucker made it actually a pretty great point soon after his disappearance. Whenever anyone brought up the idea of maybe he had committed suicide, Tucker points out how Tom had borrowed his mom's debit card the night he went missing, and there is CCTV footage of Tom at the gas station. Okay, there's bank statements to corroborate this, showing that Tom bought 21 gallons of gas at Frank Oil, a local gas station. This purchase was at 11:36 p.m., just after Tom and Christian had said goodbye for the night, meaning after he had seen his last friend for the evening. No one else saw him after this point. He was disappeared after this point. But we do have this footage from the gas station of him filling up his tank. I mean, quite literally, he was getting 21 gallons. So Tucker, his brother, makes the point to say it doesn't make any sense to him that Tom would use his mother's money to fill up his tank just to literally go from there to drive out into the woods to commit suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that's a very valid point to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like when we talk about Ellen Greenberg.
Yes.
Are you going to say it?
I was about to give you credit and say it's very similar to Ellen Greenberg and the milliliters of urine in her bladder, right?
Oh, that's a different one. But also with the gas, she left school approaching a blizzard that day and filled up, because she was a teacher, and she filled up her tank and went home. Mm-hmm. So for Josh Stein, the governor of Pennsylvania, sup Josh, who was the AG at the time of Ellen's death, and would like to say that this was a suicide. Either way, it's not often that someone's filling up their tank of gas before they do something like this. So anyway, that's just a side note, but keep it in mind. So by now there was a standstill. All right. The investigation did not seem to be going anywhere. Penny didn't like that Nathan Lewis seemed to focus on this potential fetish of Tom's. We have more than one person talking about Nathan Lewis, talking about Tom being gay, talking about the diapers. There's actually like some verbiage that maybe Nathan had said, bless you, everybody take a drink.
Sorry about that.
This show is sponsored by Brian's Allergies. And so either way, there is some narrative that Nathan Lewis had some pretty harsh things to say in terms of calling Tom a freak. And some other things like that. And so it's pretty yucky if you think that early on, this is kind of where his brain went. But either way, just keep that in mind. So he's continuing to say that Tom had run off with someone and left town. I'm not sure where he came to this theory. We don't have any evidence to support this whatsoever, but that was certainly where he seemed to go with this case. So Penny was also very unhappy that Tom's truck was given back to her just the day after police looked at it. So around this time, Nathan Lewis and Chief Deputy Brent Clapp called for help. They requested FBI and Texas Rangers to come to Canadian to assist in this investigation. So soon after these guys get in town, they also wanted to meet with Penny and Chris. Okay, so now you've got a Texas Ranger and an FBI agent. And so according to Penny, a Texas Ranger says, and I quote, "I think your son just ran off. The great news is that he's alive, and when he wants to talk to you again, he'll just pick up the phone and call you." Can you imagine?
I'm going to tell you what. Very seldom do I ever have to light somebody up.
Mm-hmm.
And it has happened during investigations like that. Again, you don't say stuff like that unless you know for a fact. Mm-hmm. If you're working a missing person, and you've talked to that person on the phone or verified through FaceTime, you've met with them, face to face, however you want to do it. I don't care. But you don't say stuff like that to a family member that, oh, well, they're just whatever. And when they're ready, they'll come back.
Yeah, I mean, he literally says, the great news, he's alive. When he wants to talk to you, he'll just pick up the phone and call you. That's wild to me.
Yeah, I don't. Unless there is something they knew and
they never come back and say it.
Right.
They've never come back to his mother to say, This is why we say what we're saying. So Penny says that she was stunned, obviously. She asked the officers where they had gotten their information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So according to Penny, a Texas Ranger said, friends. What friends? She asked.
Mm-hmm.
We can't tell you. But they never have. They've never come back to say, hey, he's fine. He's, whatever. And don't worry, we're going to get to why they never did. All right.
Yeah.
But they're awfully certain about this until they can't be any longer. So according to Nathan Lewis, when he appeared on a local radio show. My word, there's a show called Chris Samples Radio Show, and Nathan Lewis takes to the press tour early on. So he goes to this radio show, and Nathan Lewis says the same thing. Allow me to play you a little clip of my phone not working, of Nathan Lewis on the Chris Samples radio show, and this is what he says regarding what happened to Tom. This is early on in the investigation, guys.
It's absolutely possible. So last week what we did, we set everything down, put everything out on the table, had a conference, if you will, and just went over everything. We had the family come in, we visited with them, we told them where we're at, what we're doing, what we're looking through. So what that entailed was looking over everything that we have found through the young man's home, through his vehicle, talking to friends, close confidants, and everything that we have learned through this investigation, Chris, has led us to believe, we are quite positive, us and also the DPS officials and the Rangers, that Mr. Brown left on his own. We have interviewed a mass number of people. What we are coming up with by these interviews is going back and determining that the young man did leave voluntarily. We have not found anything at this point on giving us a direction of who he left with. So, no, we have no idea on somebody that helped him out. But, yes, somebody did help him out. Somebody does know where Mr. Brown is, absolutely.
Okay. Did we all listen to that? Everybody hear that? Did you hear what I know you're typing, but did you hear what he just said a second ago?
I apologize. I was addressing let me make a correction about because there's a comment in the chats about that, about doing like FaceTime and stuff like that for missing persons. And so the comment was basically like, be careful, because now you can do fake AI, whatever. Yeah, I was talking about just a few years ago, using FaceTime in order to corroborate if somebody's missing or in fact just hiding from their family. Sorry.
Okay, so did you catch what he said or no?
I did not.
Okay, so he was saying at the end, basically he's just corroborating everything, or not corroborating, he's continuing to say that I think he probably ran off after we have all these multiple interviews. And then toward the end of that, he said, we have no way of knowing and no evidence to show who he ran off with. But yes, we believe he ran off with someone and someone helped him do that. So it just kind of goes to your point a second ago about like, why would you say this? This is wild.
And I will say, I think that probably is a lot of just inexperience and ego. Because I've never done a DWI arrest, so I would have to ask someone to help me with a DWI or go through the training. But the whole point being, I wouldn't let my ego get out of the way, and I definitely wouldn't want to get in front of a camera and start talking about
get on a radio show or giving hope to the mother, right? Like that's what he's saying is going on. Because I'd much rather think that my son ran off with somebody than the worst. So I'm going to start holding on to that. But she knew something seemed different with that, right? So Nathan Lewis was on the radio show not even 6 weeks after Tom's disappearance saying what you just heard him say. All right. So that's another just wild thing to me. And on the heels of him saying, we have no evidence to show this. We have no idea or lead as to who he would have gone off with. But yes, that's what we think happened. And that's what we're going to figure out. So local businesses began offering rewards or tips that led to solving the disappearance of Tom. Prayer vigils were held, but still nothing seemed to be moving in the case whatsoever. But then something huge happened. Okay. Questions at this point get even bigger because a worker for the electric company was driving on Lake Marvin Road. Remember, the one road consistent throughout this entire case, a secluded road that runs about 14 miles to the Lake Marvin Reservoir. All right. So as he drove, something caught his eye. So just a few feet from the road was a backpack. It was sitting upright. It was red and black, and it rested behind a barbed wire fence and under some trees. Again, guys, just picture what I said. There's a water treatment plant off in the distance, a river that goes through the Canadian River. You've got kind of a service road. So this is very, very rural. Not a lot of, that would make sense that an electric worker might be out there, right? But it's not a lot of traffic and just townspeople driving through. So the electric worker remembered hearing about Tom Brown. So after he had already passed this backpack, it's only been just a few weeks, right? I think at this point, right at or just under 2 months since Tom had disappeared. So when he remembered this, he thought, oh gosh. So he drove back to where the backpack was seen and he opened it. And according to him, the backpack had some books, papers, really just typical school stuff, okay? And the papers had Tom's name on them. And Tom's school-issued laptop was also inside this backpack. He immediately put the backpack down. He went straight to the sheriff's department. So he left it where it was. Good thinking. Drives to the department. So Nathan Lewis gets there. He's on scene. All involved agree that the backpack couldn't have been tossed, say, like from a moving vehicle to where it landed. All right. Because it's location determined. That would be impossible because it would have had to have gone, like behind this barbed wire fence, under this thicket of trees. It just wouldn't make sense. And then also land perfectly upright against the base of this tree. All right. The backpack did have some mold and growth on it. There was an indentation in the grass where the backpack had been sitting. And so it was evident that it had been there for a while. So this would be kind of consistent with a couple of months, maybe, which would be the length of time that Tom had been gone. So just as confusing as how the backpack was found was where it was found. Okay, so we have security camera footage of Tom Brown's Durango, if you remember, like I was telling you, slowly driving down Lake Marvin Road and eventually parking under that grove of trees near the water treatment plant, where it was ultimately, found and processed, if you will, because that really didn't happen either. This would have been right at about 6 a.m. on the morning of Thanksgiving. So if Tom was driving his truck, parked it there, and walked to where the backpack was found, he would have had to walk about 4 miles in the dark, remember, in the cold, through thick, brushy areas, marshy spots, and through the Canadian River. In fact, one of the sources I read said that it would have been about thigh-high water in the Canadian River in the dark and a 4-mile trek. Okay, so that doesn't make a ton of sense, right? The only other way that Tom could have made it from where his truck was found to where the backpack was found is if he parked the vehicle, walked then toward town over Highway 60 and follows that all the way down to Lake Marvin Road and then down another road to where the backpack was found. But then this would have actually been closer to 8 miles away. Okay. Mm-hmm. But now you'd be banking on him doing this before the sun came up, because by the time he gets on the main Highway 60, there are a lot of cars there. Right. And this would be before the sun came up. While people in the town were looking for him. Remember, his friends and family set out immediately. By dawn, they were all out on the roads. And this would have given him about an hour and a half to cover this 8 miles. So that's not very likely either. So by now, both the private investigator, Philip Klein, remember, and Sheriff Nathan Lewis had made appearances on the Chris Samples radio show. So the one I played the clip from earlier, that's that Chris Samples guy. So Philip Klein had been on the show as well, and he was saying something had to have happened to Tom. So he wasn't necessarily going to go on this show. But after Nathan Lewis was and spews that mess about, we're confident that Tom left town on his own accord with someone's aid to kind of help him slip out to be undetected. Then Klein decides to get on because he wants to kind of set it straight to say, hey, these things aren't really making a lot of sense. So nothing that we've found yet necessarily points to foul play, but it certainly doesn't point to Tom leaving under the cover of darkness to go out of town. Okay. So he gets on to say his piece and that none of this made sense, but Nathan Lewis got inflamed over this. So do you remember earlier when I said these two? Like it just goes back and forth. So Nathan Lewis gets back on the Chris Samples show to say his piece. And here on the Chris Samples show, Nathan Lewis answers the question that asked him if he thinks that Tom Brown could have been met with violence. So let's see what Sheriff Nathan Lewis says when he's asked that question.
Chris, I can't. There's just absolutely no evidence that supports at this time that that's even something considerable. We don't have any evidence laying out in front of us saying that an assault or homicide occurred. At this time, the sheriff's office has no evidence to support the following assertions: that the car was driven by someone other than Tom Brown at any time during the night. The backpack recovered by the sheriff's department was planted as a diversion. Tom Brown was assaulted and or killed intentionally or accidentally, and Tom's body was dumped in around Hemphill County. At this time, we have no evidence to support any of those assertions made by Klein Investigation. Chris, I can't.
All right. So he's going on to say, y'all, weeks after the disappearance, it's easier for him to come to the conclusion that Tom snuck away with a stranger with the help of someone to get out of town. When, by the way, Tom had there was no indication that he was unhappy where he was. He was about to graduate high school. He was student body president, all of these things. He was going on to study broadcasting. He was looking at colleges. Nothing even in his home life would point towards something like this. But people do things that are uncharacteristic. Okay, fine. But let's say that you think that could have been what happened. It's easier for Nathan Lewis to say that he ran off like this, and then to say, sure, we found his truck at a really odd spot where we've never found it before. Sure, he filled up the tank, but yet it was found right there in town. Sure, we never saw him after that. There was blood on the door handle of the truck, but it was probably from a knuckle injury, is what he said. There was fresh urine at the truck, but we're not going to test that because I'm not the FBI, right? And then we're going to find his backpack 2 months later and say that it was staged there because somebody wants it to look like he was met with foul play and his body was dumped somewhere.
I don't know where people get into theory land.
I don't know how that's easier to come up with. Isn't it much easier, in fact, to say, and safer, to say, something looks awry here. Mm-hmm. Why do we have this backpack? And okay, let's rule it out. Let's figure out what it's not.
You have to explain it at every step. That's all.
Well, he did. It was staged. And his explanation is just that he said it. That's if he says it, that's the why. All right. So, like I said, sure, we don't have a smoking gun. We don't have a witness to murder, but, and this is where in my notes I'm saying, but Brian, how would your team do this here? How would how would you think about this isn't evidence? So by April of 2017, so this is just a few months later, Philip Klein hired a dog handler out of Atlanta, Georgia. Her name is Trace Sargent. Okay, so Trace was a well-respected figure in her career. She brought her cadaver dog, Chance, all the way to Canadian Texas from Georgia, and Chance roamed all through the town and all the places that Tom was known to have been, particularly in his last moments. Finally, it was time to check Tom's Durango. Chance sniffed at the Durango, and Chance sat, and it was considered to be a hit. So this means that the smell of decomposition was present per this dog in Tom's vehicle. The handler is very quick to say, I cannot say a dead body was there. That's not what my job is to say. It's that my dog hit on this particular smell, which would indicate at least blood loss, if not, then potentially decomposition. Okay. So some people will speculate that maybe Tom had already died. Someone else was driving his vehicle when it went down Lake Marvin Road and did something with his body at that time, rather than just having it in their head that Tom was driving the vehicle the whole time. So meanwhile, Hemphill Sheriff's Office isn't really wanting to help with or investigate any leads that Philip Klein's people have uncovered. So that's kind of the thing. So I understand that for some police officers, it could be frustrating when they're trying to investigate a case and someone from the outside that's hired privately comes in. But the difference is Klein is not trying to get information from them. And I think that that's something you've spoken on, where you guys had a case, at different points, and maybe a PI comes in and is like, let me, tell me what you got on this. And you're like, well, I'm not going to tell you anything. It's an active investigation. Yeah. But Philip Klein kind of seems to be doing it the right way. Instead, he's saying, hey, let me bring you what I found. He's not asking anything of them. So he's like, hey, out of my own money, which, by the way, Philip is paid between $25,000 to $75,000 for different missing persons cases. So he is not paid lightly. So he takes those funds, but I will say he uses them. So he hires a really renowned dog handler in Atlanta, Georgia, and gets her to come out with her dog, right? And so he tries to bring that to Nathan Lewis and the crew. He says he was about laughed out of the sheriff's department. That they legitimately, he said, I looked at them and asked him if it was an elementary school. Like, they are just laughing.
Oh, you mean he said, what is this, an elementary school, when they're laughing?
Yeah. Because they were just laughing out loud at him for wanting, because what he wanted to do then particularly after the dog sat or hit on the Durango that belonged to Tom, was, okay, hey guys, can we just get that backpack? I don't have to touch it. You guys can stand right beside it, keep it however you want, but can we get the dog to sniff the backpack? Mm-hmm. Like, because this is what we got over here. And absolutely not. Nathan mm-hmm. Lewis. And that's one of the first times that Klein says, I knew then, like, this is going to be a problem. Like, mm-hmm. they don't actually want an investigation to happen. Mm-hmm. All right. So while they weren't really, meaning the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office wasn't wanting to do much in terms of working alongside Klein, they did go on and talk back to Tom's friends again. So this is where it gets a little, like, think what you will about Delphi, think what you will about Richard Allen, but I'll tell you, if you want to hear how not to interview someone that you're charging with something, murder, anything, mm-hmm. If you've got someone in a room to interview, all the ways not to do it are to go back and listen to the I believe he became a lieutenant, but the investigator that interviewed Richard Allen, who was arrested for the murder of the Delphi girls in mm-hmm. Indiana. I would say you listen to a lot of that. I would mm-hmm. say that's probably, like, if that were my job, if that's what I did as a profession, I'm showing that like day one. Hey guys, let's make sure we're not doing anything like this. And that's kind of what happens when Tom's friends are investigated, or I say investigated, when they are interviewed. It's an interesting way to go about things. So Texas Ranger Mike Smith and FBI agent Scott Hendricks had Tom's friend Christian Webb pulled out of her class at Oklahoma State University. If you remember, she was considered to be Tom's best friend. Mm-hmm. They were very, very close. She knew Tom's secrets. She talks about things. She'll say sometimes Tom wore a mask. Everybody thought he was just so happy. I think that's kind of all of us, right? You can, everybody's got something. And so, but she loved Tom very much. And she was one of the last people to see him that night that they were all hanging out on Thanksgiving holiday. So she offers her phone so that they could thoroughly comb through it. So again, this was a Texas Ranger and an FBI agent. Mind you, this was April of 2017. This is 5 months after Tom's disappearance. They had also obtained her cell phone records prior to their visit. So what they really wanted to understand was a string of communication from a number of an unknown individual with a Denver, Colorado phone number. Okay, so stay with me. I'll keep this brief, but it does sound a little confusing. So Tom's friend Christian was, like I said, one of his best friends. She had a friend named Macy. Macy had already graduated and moved to go to art school in Denver. Okay, so Christian's friend Macy befriended a boy in Denver named Nathan McGuire. So at some point, Macy had introduced Nathan McGuire to Christian. No big deal, right? And they kind of hit it off, and they had become buddies. So Christian's phone records showed that from December 31st of 2016, about a month after Tom went missing, until April 6th of 2017, she had exchanged thousands of texts with Nathan McGuire. Now, if they really hit it off, let me tell you something. It doesn't take a long time to acquire thousands of texts. What do you know about that?
Yeah.
You know anything about that? All right.
Yeah. It's a good thing we didn't have to pay
oh my gosh.
The old fee, like 10 cents per text or whatever.
I do remember that happening early on with me getting a cell phone, and that was not a fun conversation when I was a kid. So with this information, law enforcement floated the idea that Christian, right, his best friend, helped Tom quietly leave town, and that Tom is now using Nathan McGuire's phone to communicate with Christian. Christian says that nothing at all like this happened. She thought this was crazy. So here's the deal. That's a quick fix, right? Mm-hmm. So we just go find Nathan McGuire. We talk to him. We seize his phone, his records. And if we determine that it's Tom talking, like, do you have a stowaway in your apartment, Nathan? Does one Tom Brown live here with you in your Denver apartment? I mean, like, this is silly, but this is what they initially come up with. Because remember, they were in that theory of Tom ran off. So, like, everything now has to corroborate Tom running off. I will say it's interesting because we got some other numbers, like some other situations with that Denver, Colorado number. And it's one of the last ones kind of to go through that whole circle of friends, including Tom, before Tom disappeared. So I'm not saying it's not worth checking out, but it doesn't in any way look like the flavor that Tom left to now use this guy's phone to communicate with Christian. That was bizarre. So listen to this. They interrogate Christian for over 4 hours to the point she said that she started to cry and she was nauseated. She almost vomited. Mm-hmm. She said they kept demanding truth. They kept telling her she was lying. She was crying. They asked her to take a polygraph and she agreed. She actually kind of pleaded with them. She's so confused and like really upset by now. But they just left and they actually never came back and didn't communicate further with her. Okay. It gets stranger because that same night, Christian's parents went out to eat. They happened to run into old Sheriff Nathan Lewis while dining. So Christian's mother, Anita, says that Sheriff Lewis apologized. So he comes up to her, oh, Miss Anita, like, I'm so sorry for the aggressive, interview with your daughter today for all those hours, right? That we were waiting in an SUV outside of her biology lab at OSU to pull her out to talk to her. But he apologizes. He says, actually, don't worry about it. If you plan to hire any legal representation for your daughter, don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. It's all good. We've cleared her, which they didn't know that she needed to be cleared. But he says, we've cleared her. And he said, quote, listen, we know that Thomas has run off with an older man to Colorado. He's somewhere in Colorado with an older man. Now, Nathan Lewis will later say he didn't ever say this, but there's a few of these, like I said earlier, instances where he'll say, oh, I never said that. We have kind of multiple different people saying, well, that's when Nathan Lewis told me this. So this goes along with what he keeps saying, that Tom ran off. Now he's saying with an older man, which is also kind of weird because the phone records for Nathan McGuire, he was a teen or like a young adult. Like he wasn't an older man. Okay, so now Christian is thoroughly shaken. She's very upset. Like she's terrified. She sees SUVs, thinks they're going to pull her in again. Like they really shook her to the core. So it really kind of continues on because then the Texas Rangers and the FBI focused on Tom's other friend, Caleb King. Essentially, it was the same type of interrogation, okay? Caleb says that they said, quote, we don't believe you. We don't. If we find something, we're coming for you. You're done, son.
Don't call me son. Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? No, so it's like it's one of those where they're doing like that, like I'm just gonna bad cop you into whatever, which we've talked about. You don't want to force a confession, okay? But either way, these kids are saying, hey, look, no, I don't. I understand interviewing them multiple times. They were the last people to see Tom, and arguably they knew him better than anyone else. That's fine. But they're putting these kids in a room doing the, the fist to the table. You're going to be done if we find out you did have some, just talk to them. Just interview them, right? So he says he was freaking out. He offers to take a polygraph. And he said, I had nothing else. I had nothing else to do. Like, I'm offering, please do the polygraph. Like, I don't know how else to prove to you that I don't know anything about this. But they didn't actually let him take one. So in the meantime, Penny Meeks held a press conference. And so here she makes it known. She was basically done. Now she's saying, I don't have any faith in the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office. Now, she did not start out this way. She didn't start out bad-mouthing them. She just hired her own investigator when she questioned how they were handling the case. But now she says, you know what? I'm kind of done here. She thinks that they were initially going to be doing good work, but they seemed to make some assumptions early on, and this stifled any potential investigation moving forward. So Nathan Lewis was actually at this press conference, and he maintained that they had done all that they could do, but that there's zero evidence. So this was still considered a missing persons case. He continued to state that since he had not seen any evidence of foul play, there's nothing to investigate. Oh.
Well, if you go off of what they've been saying, they have been investigating. They have been interviewing people. They have been somehow coming up with the information that he ran off with an older man in Colorado. So somehow they came across that and bought into it. If in fact it's true, who knows? But at some point in the investigation, that has to either come out from some kind of phone extraction, somebody telling you that. I mean, social media hit or something, or a social media comment. So, I don't know. You don't get to kind of come up with theories, and you've heard me say it, but like you can't throw something like that. One, you can't throw information like that out there that you can't prove. And then you wait until everything is done, and then you sit down with the family and you go through it. And if it's a missing person, it's a missing person. If there's still leads that you're working on, you can keep them up to date throughout the investigation with a little bit at a time. But you don't go out there and say stuff like that.
Well, I think, and I've used this analogy a lot talking about this case. We have a teenager in the house, and if you guys are familiar now, there's that Life 360. Okay. So it's like the tracking app. It's, there's a free plan, a paid plan, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's actually a pretty cool, like device, or I say device, application on your phone, because you can see where anyone that's signed up, that you're like tied to on your phone, you can see where they're going, where they are, if they're on foot, if they're in a car, how fast that car was driving. It's actually pretty cool, especially for like teenagers and stuff. But in saying that, the teenager here, when I'll say things like, "Hey, where are you, buddy?" Like when I say, "Hey, why did you go to this place, then to this place, then to this place?" You never asked me if you could go from one to the next and the next. And his logic has become, and I've learned amongst his friends' parents that this seems to be the general logic amongst them all, is that like, oh, you can see where I am. Like, therefore, I don't have to ask you anything because you can just always see where I am. Okay. Which, if I were a kid, I get it. That's fair. But that is like the opposite, right? Like, it's like you still have to get the permission. And then now it's more of like, I know if you're being honest with me, or in an emergency, I know where to find you, right? Like, that's kind of how you use it. I say that because at every turn here, and this is going to continue until all the way up through the AG's office that we're going to talk about in a moment. But when Nathan Lewis says this about, we have no evidence of foul play, so there's nothing to investigate. Buddy, you've got a truck parked somewhere really weird. You've got a shell casing for a 25 caliber weapon in that truck, and that's not a weapon that Tom or any of his family owns, and you've never found that weapon. You've got a backpack that shows up 2 months later in a weird spot that you've just found, and it's got all of his belongings in it. What you don't have are Tom's keys, Tom's wallet, Tom's cell phone. Okay, so you've got a lot of things to investigate. So you don't need to see a dead body or have someone say they witnessed a murder to now say, I have evidence and now I'm going to investigate. It's such backward logic. And look, I say that knowing full well I'm not an investigator. It's not my line of work. But I feel like you don't have to be one to see that that's just really not how this kind of thing goes. So meanwhile, Philip Klein was busy organizing a search party. So quick recap, if you remember, Tom went missing on November 23rd, 2016. His truck was found the next day beside the water treatment plant. 2 months later, that backpack was found a few miles away. About a year after Tom went missing, Philip Klein says he received a tip. This person stated that they had been told that Tom's body would be found somewhere near the road where Tom's backpack had been found. So based off of this tip, which Philip Klein, for reasons he does not want to disclose to the public, felt was a really credible tip, he took this tip so seriously that he chose to conduct a search all the way down Lake Marvin Road, which was 12 miles long. All right. So they actually put out almost like an all call for volunteers. And then they vetted these volunteers and whittled down the 500 volunteers that wanted to be a part of this to about 150. So I feel like it was pretty decent. It wasn't such a thrown together sloppy work in that sense. So they have these 150 volunteers, and they were instructed to also be on the lookout for things that went missing with Tom. Like I just mentioned, right? His phone, glasses, his keys. And like I told you, that 25 caliber shell casing had been found in Tom's truck. So the volunteers also knew to keep an eye out for a small caliber handgun, right? So just minutes into the search, we're talking, I think some sources say 6 minutes in. I mean, they have just gotten started, and a phone was found in the grass by one of the volunteers. So immediately Klein and others looked at the phone, but he'll say his quote verbatim was like, "Oh, I thought that there's no way that's Tom's. That can't be Tom's." And the reason he said that is because it had been 11 months since Tom's disappearance, but this phone that was found was nearly perfect. There weren't scratches, cracks. There was no damage to it of any kind. The charging port was free of any dirt or debris. Even though the area had experienced record rainfall, there was no indication that any water damage had taken place to the phone. Okay. Nonetheless, the phone was bagged. It was entered into evidence and it was given to a deputy that was also at the search. The phone was to go to the FBI at that point to a lab for testing. So the search continued on, but nothing else of any importance really was found at that time. So finally, then in January of 2018, 3 months or so after that search, the FBI calls. All right. They have interesting news. They had been kind of backed up and they had a lot of cases that they were going through. So they couldn't really get to that phone earlier on. But they had finally investigated the phone that had been found. And sure enough, it was Tom's. So this is when that finger pointing really gets ugly. So if you thought it was bad between Nathan Lewis and Philip Klein before, it hasn't even started yet. All right. So it was clear that the phone could not have possibly been in the field for the entire year. In fact, the FBI forensic data shows that no, like the sensors that like water sensors or moisture sensors had been tripped. So like it had not been sitting out in the elements for a year with all this rainfall. That field had just recently been I'm not sure if it was bush hogged or actually just mowed, but it was out in kind of big brush. So it had been mowed by the city, by the county. The phone, again, no scratches, dirt, it was in perfect condition. Okay. Clean and shiny. So it had not been out there, but where had it been and who had it actually been with? And this is what becomes a point of contention. So Sheriff Nathan Lewis was very quick to tell Tom's mother that it seemed quite a coincidence. So listen to what I'm saying. The sheriff tells Tom's mom, Penny, he's already called her a liar. He's already had some choice words about all of this. And says to her, well, it seems to be quite a coincidence that Tom's phone was found in the exact area that her private investigator had called for a search to take place. Nathan Lewis thought that Philip Klein had been in possession of the phone the whole time and planted it there to make himself look good when it was found. I feel like that's quite an accusation.
That you can feel that. You just don't say it out loud. If you think that, if you go, because okay, it is a little strange, right? When you go, oh, hey, we're going to do this search.
Now we just find
this is the information we've
got. It's also
the
first time a search party has been done anywhere near where the child's truck had been found. So,
but it's also one of those where you get information from a source. You can't out the source. You can't say how you got the information because then everybody will know who the source is. But the source may say, if you're looking for that, whatever 357. Check the bushes near the store. It's going to be there. And then guess what? You go over there, you check, and you find it. So it's like you don't, but I didn't plant the pistol there or the other officer didn't plant, you get information. So it sounds like he got information that led him in that area.
Yeah. And now, to be fair, the tipster was saying that that's where they would find his body in this area, kind of near where the truck had been found, and nothing had been mentioned about the phone. But sure, to your point, if Nathan wants to be suspicious of Philip Klein, even though Nathan is the one who is like manifested theory after theory after theory and said it to be fact.
Yeah.
Either way, that's fine. But like you said, you don't go to that child's mother to now say, oh, that's funny with your PI, right? So needless to say, Klein was infuriated at this accusation. He actually then wrote an email. I've read it. It's super professional, but you can tell he's very pissed. And this email was sent out to all of the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office. So everyone that worked there gets this email, and it basically explained that he'd never been accused of such a thing. Of course, it's much more lengthy than this, but he's saying that never in all of his years has anyone from law enforcement or otherwise ever suggested that he would be unethical, that he would plant evidence, that anything like this had happened. He went on to say how unprofessional they were to have done so and to implicate him in that manner. And this rift only actually got bigger because when Klein asked Nathan Lewis how he would have even had Tom's phone as it was, how would he have even become in possession of that?
Yeah.
Nathan Lewis said, oh, well, Penny probably had it the whole time, talking about Tom's mother. So now he's implicating the mother in this.
Yeah.
Okay. So Nathan Lewis said that a few weeks after Tom's disappearance, listen to this, guys. So he says that the sheriff says that just a few weeks after Tom goes missing, Tom's mother, Penny, did something that seemed really weird, and that she had texted Tom's friend, Caleb King. She had texted Caleb's mother, Robin, and asked if Caleb or his friends knew the 4-digit password to Tom's iPhone. So Nathan Lewis will say, well. I think Penny had that phone all along, and I think she wanted to get it. Okay, first of all, why? Or even if she did, why is that bad? Like, okay, but why would she hide the fact that she had the phone? So it says, okay, he says, well, get a load of these apples. His, Tom's mother, weeks later, asked his friend what the passcode was. So when Penny is asked about this, like, well, why was it that you were needing the passcode if you didn't have his phone or didn't need it? First of all, I think that's an easy answer anyway. Like, if I have his iPad, if I have anything, give me any of the codes that you have, because I'm going to cross them with any electronic device that I can find. But either way, when she's asked about this, she says, oh, no. She says, oh, the reason I asked Caleb, she never denies asking. She says, the reason I asked Caleb's mom if Caleb had the password to Tom's phone is because I had received a call from the Hemphill County Sheriff's Department from Brent Clapp, who asked if I had the password. And she says, and I quote, I was irritated with the Sheriff's Department by now. I was frustrated. I didn't feel like they were doing a lot. And she said, so at first I said, look, I've already told you I don't know his passwords. So at first she kind of shut him down because she had already said she didn't, that's all the information she has. But then she said she asked Brent Clapp why he needed it. And he said, oh, we're just trying to tie up some loose ends. Which even on their part, that would be fine too. That doesn't mean somebody has this smoking gun of a phone. Yeah. They're just trying to figure things out. But she said she thought, okay, I'm going to make an effort. And she said, I don't know why they need it, but I'll try to find some password for them. And so she says that that's when she called Caleb's mom to ask for the password. It wasn't because she secretly had this phone the whole time. So when this is looked into a little bit more, Brent Clapp will say that he never asked Penny for the password for Tom's phone. When Penny is asked if maybe it's possible that she got the deputy's name wrong that had called her, and maybe she just mistook that for Brent Clapp, she says no, she was certain his name was Brent Clapp, and he asked her for that password. So I will tell you that at some point the Texas Attorney General says it's been, that's been figured out. It's been cleared that the Sheriff's Department never asked her for that. She still says that they did. So I'm not sure how it's been clear that they never, other than that they say that they didn't. So finally, after the FBI notified everyone that the found phone was Tom's, Penny had enough. So she and some friends made a Facebook page. You can go follow it now. It's still active. In fact, it was just active this week. And it's called, Moms for Tom, the number 4, Moms for Tom. And there she started a petition to have a state agency take over the investigation. And in less than 24 hours, approximately 5,400 people, by the way, that's like twice the population of Canadian Texas. About like 5,400 people had signed this petition, in less than 24 hours. So Nathan Lewis said he was, quote, tired of all the bull crap. These are his words. And he wrote to the Texas Attorney General's office and asked them to, quote, formally take over the responsibility for this missing persons case we have. Now, granted, they need to independently investigate this, so it really shouldn't matter the narrative that he's painting, but he's already setting the scene that we have a missing person. Nothing a little suspicious, a little bizarre the way some of these things were found. The truck's found the next day. The backpack's found 2 months later, and the phone is found a year later in pristine condition. I feel like everything every new development is a fishier subject. It's a stronger point to, something suspicious happened. Yeah. So Rachel Kading.
Sorry, I just said Ray Charles. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, Rachel Kading is actually who Brian spoke with when he called the Texas Attorney General's office. So Rachel Kading and Chris Smith from the AG's office there in Texas were assigned to Tom Brown's case. So they come in town, they re-interview everyone, and eventually they make a list of those that they would like to take a polygraph. Their first thing is, we need to get people, quote, on the box.
Okay.
On the box. What?
No, I'm just saying, like,
not you, just the idea.
Yeah, those are like terms, and like, I don't know. There's a theory I have that people sometimes in cop world and other professions are like playing, like they're pretending.
Yeah, they're like Attorney General LARPers.
Yes, yeah. Like I've heard people say that. There used to be a major that would say that
on the box.
Get him in the box. Get him in the box. We just be like, just stop. For one, we're not going to go get someone and drag them back here and put them in a room. We're going to go meet them in the cut and talk to them.
So anyway. It's just, and I just find it interesting that like your first go as the Attorney General investigators is the polygraph.
Yeah, it's weird. And maybe it's a cultural thing, like different departments, different regions. I never used them, and I'm not saying they're not a good tool. They don't work.
No, it's a decent tool, but it's just an interesting first grab.
Other detectives did, yeah, but mine is like, let me talk to somebody. Let me see.
And they did re-interview, but I guess I'm thinking like, I don't know. So, but that's what they kind of hyper focus on, and they're ready to get these folks in the box. And so then when they make this list, there's going to be 4 notable people that they wanted at the top of their list, and it's going to be Sheriff Nathan Lewis, Investigator Philip Klein, and then Penny, Tom's mother, and her husband, Chris. So Penny and Chris were happy to oblige. So they actually drove the 7 hours, I believe, to actually just interview with them for hours and hours and hours. They said that the interview went well. They thought in the sense that they were finally, I think they felt good because it felt like now new eyes are looking at Tom's case, so now this is good. They were eager to talk to Rachel Kading and Chris Smith. Well, they, toward the end of their interview, kind of just make it sound like normal, like the normal next step is now you take the polygraph, right? So they're like, sure, that's fine. So they schedule a date for it. And so Penny and Chris were happy to oblige. They sat through, like I said, that interview, and then it's time for the polygraph. So as soon as the test was over, so Penny will say that Rachel Kading and Chris Smith entered the room and began interrogating her. They did not tell her which questions she had allegedly passed or failed, but they immediately make her feel like she didn't pass this polygraph. Okay. And they did say that she knew a lot more about Tom's death than she was letting on. They continue to say, quote, "You know where he's at. You moved his body, Penny."
Okay. Okay.
You're embarrassed because he committed suicide.
Okay.
And you just don't want people to know.
At some point in that investigation, they must have come across some interviews or something to allude to that. I would hope it's not just a fishing expedition or we're just going to throw, accusations out.
I think that's very much fishing, because it's one thing to say if they have information that we don't have, and in their investigation, they have reason to believe that, like, let's say she tanked this polygraph on very specific questions, and they think she had to have moved his body because I guess at some point she told somebody that. I don't. I think it's quite a bit of conjecture to then say, furthermore, it's because he committed suicide and you were ashamed of that, and so you moved him. Yeah. That kind of feels like a stretch. But that's fine. We all know I'm a big fan of Rachel Kading. So they never offered her, though, how he committed suicide, where he committed suicide. So when they say that they have all this information and this is how they know that she did X, Y, Z, they don't give her any evidence of any of this. But they continued down this way of thinking, and Penny continued to explain how preposterous this was. She said that she said one time she looked at them and said, are you looking at me? Because I think she was just like 5'5", not a big lady. She'd already had like surgery on her back at some point. And she told them she couldn't have possibly lifted Tom when he was alive. He was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds. She said much less maneuvered his body if he had been dead. So then when she said that, they continued by saying, well, then we know someone helped you. So then they start saying that either her husband, Chris, or her other son, Tucker, helped her move Tom's body. But here's what I keep coming back to, because I will tell you, like, spoiler alert, they continue this for forevermore. Like, they continue down the path of he committed suicide. This embarrassed you, and you wanted to cover that up. Okay. This is where I sit on that, though. Do you remember at the beginning of the show, I told you that when Nathan Lewis said, what do you think could have happened to Tom? And she says, I have no idea. And then she was like, I don't know. Maybe he committed suicide. And he's like, I just found it was very odd that a woman would say something like that. He also said, she scares me. She's cold. She has no emotion. I've listened to, she's Midwestern, y'all. Like, she's not cold. She's not without emotion. She's kind of flat when she talks, but not in a way that shows you that she's like antisocial personality disorder. I've seen her tear up and cry. That's what he says. The woman never cries. He's really hateful when he talks about her. She does cry. I've seen plenty of interviews where she's cried. But why would she say, if she's so ashamed that Tom committed suicide, that she's going to go to the lengths to move and hide her own son's body? For those of you listening, Brian raised his hand.
So he's saying, or I'm sorry, during that interview, that investigation, they're saying, we're accusing, sort of leading her into, hey, you were embarrassed. He committed suicide. Therefore, you moved the body. But when she first was interviewed and reported him missing, and they said, what do you think happened? She says, I think he committed suicide. If in fact, I don't know the case, I don't know the truth, but I'm saying, if in fact that's what they thought, or anyone during that investigation thought that, why would she immediately say that, or initially say that she thought he committed suicide, instead of leaving it as a missing person? And then eventually his body's going to show up, maybe. And then they can just try to figure out what.
She'll say, she said, I had no idea. She said, I had no idea what happened. It was just so unlike him to not come home. I didn't know what happened. And she said, and then they find his truck, right? With like a little bit of blood on it and like a shell casing. So she was like, I don't know. But before they found the shell casing in the truck, she said, I don't know, maybe the choking game. Like, I don't even know. And when they said, well, why did you even say that? She said, well, my father, but you got to think Lake Marvin Road. Her father committed suicide on Lake Marvin Road. Like, so she was like, I just think, but also if she in fact helped cover up a suicide, why is she saying, forget Nathan, I'm going to hire my own private investigator to figure this out to the tune of $25,000 to $75,000. And I want him to look into this more. And I want him to polygraph everyone. And I want to take a polygraph. I want him to get a cadaver dog out on the grounds where Tom could be. And then when he's doing a great job and she thinks Nathan Lewis is still just saying that he ran off with someone to Colorado and she's frustrated, she said, no, I'm going to start an online group, file a petition, get these signatures to say, no, I actually want the state to take over this investigation.
So now you've got the state who can charge you criminally and put, find you guilty. In other words, if she committed this crime, or waste a lot of her resources financially paying someone who I guess that idea would be, she's telling him how to do this.
But that's not
fake
how this
I know. That's what I'm saying. That's where, just when you're interviewing, you talk to people.
If she covered it up, she covered it up. But why would she continue to increase the scope of the investigation? That's what doesn't make sense to me. So, speaking of Nathan Lewis, because why not? It was then that where am I here? So it was his turn now to take the polygraph. Oh, this might be my favorite part of this whole case. So I'm going to play for you like a little clip on Nathan Lewis's thoughts on the polygraph. So this is part of the interview. I told you that Skip Hollingsworth.
I'm plugging my battery.
Oh, yeah. That Skip Hollingsworth did that interview for Texas Monthly. And this is part, you'll hear a little bit of Skip's voice as he's talking to Nathan Lewis. And Nathan Lewis is explaining to him about taking this polygraph and kind of his thoughts on it. And he's got some pretty colorful thoughts here. So let me get you here. Oh, hang on.
Like me, I'll tell you about myself. I'm more of a nervous Nelly. I take Lexapro because
My goodness.
I have anxiety real bad. I've always had anxiety.
When he was hooked up to the polygraph machine, he said the examiner had a hard time even getting a baseline reading.
Well, I'm already telling him, well, shit, if that's already messing up, guy, and I tell him the truth, this ain't going to be good. I said, I'm nervous as a son of a bitch just sitting strapped into your damn chair. I'm the sheriff. I'm a law enforcement guy. I give these tests, and now I'm being strapped in here as a damn suspect. But I said, I feel like a damn suspect criminal sitting here in this damn chair. I'm nervous as son of a gun.
I'm nervous as son.
But he just said he gives those tests.
I give these tests. He kind of does everything.
You have to be through training and like certified. Like it's a pretty long course from what I understand. But I mean, whatever.
Right. So, but he goes on. So he sets the scene by saying, look, hell, I take Lexapro for anxiety. I'm a nervous Nelly kind of guy, is what he says, right?
There's an old running joke with my brother for an old TV show of cops where a guy is sadly drinking and driving, if I remember right. But either way, he's drunk. He is drinking, driving. He does a test. And the officer's like, do the whatever steps, do this. And he's like, officer, I can't do that because my leg is not as long as yours. My eyes are not as whatever round. Everything is an excuse. Like he's lined it up like I'm going to fail this test. I'm going to do your test, but I'm going to fail it.
Yeah.
My arms are not as long as yours. Same thing there. I'm already anxious. I'm already
So
nervous.
He's saying, if you can't even get a baseline on me, then how the hell are you going to know if I'm telling the truth or not? And so he actually goes on. This goes on for a while. He gets so enraged talking about this polygraph. This is the sheriff of the town, the sheriff who had been lead on this case. And he talks about the fact that one of the questions they asked him was, are you involved in the disappearance of Tom Brown? Mm-hmm. And where he gets so angry is because he's like, how are they going to ask me a question like that? How dare they? They're setting me up. They're setting me up to fail. Because his point to that, what he's trying to say is, I'm involved in the disappearance of Tom Brown because I'm working the case, but I'm not involved in the disappearance of Tom Brown. And so that's what he keeps saying.
Right.
Is this because he's kind of a dummy? Is this because he's not super experienced? And so he's like saying, or what? But he goes on to the point that he said, he's like, that's it. I'm done. And he said, I will never take another polygraph again for the rest of my life, no matter what they ask of me, no matter what happens. And these are his words verbatim. And he said, after the way they treated me there during that, trying to railroad me like that. And he said, you've made me feel guilty sitting here, all these things. And so now you've got the sheriff of town. So let's say, bad guy comes through and is getting charged with a crime and they want to polygraph somebody and he sits down and he looks at that sheriff. He's like, well, what'd you do? You know what I mean? He's like, why would I ever? I heard you said you would never do this.
And
I mean, that's it. But it was interesting. I mean, his voice continues to escalate and he's losing his mind. He actually just gets kind of ragey about it. Moving forward, Philip Klein was next to be polygraphed. And as far as we know, he passed everything. So January 9th, 2019. So now it's been about 2 years since Tom disappeared. We are, believe it or not, starting to wrap it up here, guys. This was kind of long. But so it's been 2 years later. There has been no news. Finally, there was a massive, massive development in the case. So Hemphill County Sheriff's Deputy Pine Gregory. Okay, so stick with me, guys. We're going to wrap it up, and this is the part you want to hear. Pine Gregory was driving around on duty. He had a hobby of collecting deer antlers. So he parked near Lake Marvin Road. Here we are again. It's wild, right? Mm-hmm. So this was around 12 miles from where Tom's phone had been found. So Pine Gregory says he's parked his patrol car. He's following a deer trail because he's kind of taking a break from work. You know what I mean? Like, let's go find some deer antlers. So he follows this deer trail away from the road, and as he approached a thicket of trees, he saw what he said looked like a white ball. He realizes as he gets closer that it appears to actually be made of bone. And as he leans over it, he sees what appears to be 2 eye sockets and some teeth. And he immediately calls Sheriff Nathan Lewis. Nathan Lewis will say, I was with my wife at the baby doctor, and I get a call from Pine Gregory. You can't make this stuff up. Mm-hmm. So law enforcement arrives quickly. They were able to recover a femur, several small bones, a pair of tennis shoes, and what was left of some blue jeans. And finally, they found what looked to be a kind of chewed upon partial Texas driver's license, which bore the name Thomas Kelly Brown, and Tom had been found. So before we even go to the next sentence, please remember the confidence with which the Texas Ranger, the FBI agent, and Nathan Lewis himself told everybody that Tom most certainly has run off with someone else to Colorado. We don't know who it is, but we know he did it. Tom has run off with an older man to Colorado. We had Tom was aided in leaving by a friend of his to get to Colorado. Tom is living in Colorado and using Nathan McGuire's cell phone to text Christian, his friend. Remember how confident he was in all of these things? Mm-hmm. Well, it's because there was never any evidence to that. So when we say like, well, maybe he kept it from the parents because Tom was no longer a minor and it wasn't their business. No, it's because they had no evidence to it because it didn't happen. Tom was right there in town the whole time. Okay. And so, Tom's remains were sent to the University of North Texas's Center for Human Identification in Fort Worth. They no longer do it. Actually, a different campus location. I did call them. I talked to them because I was curious as to why it didn't go to any other like state pathologist lab. And at that time, the University of North Texas Human Identification Center within the biology department there on campus was actually really well renowned on forensic like pathology of remains. And so the doctor, Gil King is his name. He has since retired. Sent him an email. Haven't heard back, but I used his university email, so we'll see. But he was the one who actually initially led the team that conducted the autopsy on Thomas Brown. And so anyway, he's got some pretty cool accolades there. But this is where Tom's body was sent to be analyzed and to be assessed. So nothing significant was really found at the scene, meaning we didn't find any weapons, okay, in terms of even, if it was foul play or otherwise. There were no ropes or cords if we're looking at something that looks like a suicide. We don't have toxicology for the body at this point. It's been 2 years. We've just got bones remaining. But then in August of 2019, 7 months after Tom's remains were found, Attorney General investigators held a meeting, and attending this meeting were Tom's mom, Penny, and her husband, Chris, Tom's brother, Tucker, some women from that Moms for Tom Facebook group, Tom's dad, Kelly Brown, his dad's pastor, and Philip Klein was there. Sheriff Nathan Lewis was also there with some deputies, along with the Hemphill County DA and a Texas Ranger that had been on the case. Okay, so again, this would be the Texas Attorney General's office was calling this invitation-only meeting. This was 7 months after Tom's remains had been found. Someone, a champion, you may call them, a hero, if you will, secretly recorded this meeting. So you can go back and listen to it, and it's quite interesting to hear. It's one thing to read the words in transcript. It's an entirely different thing to hear emotions get heated and to hear when someone who may not be very confident with their work tries to speak with confidence, because often I think that comes out in anger. And I think that that's exactly what we hear here between Rachel Kading, the Attorney General's office investigator, and the DA, because the DA starts to speak and he is fired up about nothing. So Rachel Kading conducted the meeting, and it was safe to say that basically everyone there was pretty much disappointed, except for Nathan Lewis, with what she had to say. So she and her partner let everyone know at that point there was no reason to continue the investigation at that time. And her reason was interesting because she said that they'd found no evidence. Remember, we're doing this backward ideology again. No evidence to lead them to believe that Tom had been the victim of foul play. She said, quote, "We don't have any evidence that we could take to a district attorney to get any type of charges filed. We're nowhere close to that. There's just nothing. There's not even something to build on. I mean, we have no answers as to anything. What charges do we need to be filed to investigate this as a suspicious death? We're not implicating anyone. We're not saying this guy murdered him. We're saying this is bizarre."
And there are murder investigations that go on for years and years and years, and you still don't have enough to go to in front of a grand jury for a suspect, but you're still investigating it.
It's the most bizarre thing. So, and I'm going to read you the paragraph later, but the DA comes back to say the same thing. We're nowhere close to a grand jury indictment. We have no evidence. No one says you have an indictment. We're saying investigate it as a suspicious death. That is all. Like, make it an investigation. That is all. So she said that the rumors around town had not been credible and they had complicated and compromised the investigation. So, in fact, all investigators, you will hear Nathan Lewis say it. You will hear a Texas Ranger say it. One of the FBI guys say it. They all actually, at one point or another, blame the citizens in Canadian Texas for muddying the investigation with their rumors. So they keep saying, we have no evidence. Furthermore, we can't investigate because of all the rumor mills. Mm. Rachel Kading went on to say, quote, he could have died from natural causes for all we know. I mean, I guess technically speaking, Tom Brown could have driven himself out into the woods and had a heart attack at 18 and made sure that succinctly his car was found the next day. His backpack was found 2 months later. His phone was found a year later in perfect condition.
And a mysterious
body would
caliber
be
shell casing.
25 caliber shell casing with no gun that's ever been found to it, and then his body 2 years later found. True, it could have been natural causes. So let me, as we begin to wrap up, read you a couple of things that they said, and you're gonna be interested to hear this. So the investigators also criticized Klein's theories, that Tom had been, had met with foul play. So Philip Klein consistently will say, I don't think that was Tom Brown driving that truck around. We have a couple of CCTV reels where it shows Tom Brown's truck at 2 different points in the night driving down this highway. And then the one that ultimately leads him to the water tower where that Durango had been found. So pretty early on, Klein was saying, we can't get caught up thinking that just because we're seeing his vehicle that it's Tom driving it. In fact, at that point, Tom may have already not been with us. We know that Tom's cell phone was cut off as of 11:56. It was off, never to be turned on again. If you were wondering about his school-issued laptop that was found in his backpack 2 months later, it was off. It had been off the whole time, okay? So the investigators, meaning this Rachel Kading from the Attorney General's office, she already had a bad taste in her mouth for Philip Klein, kind of like Nathan Lewis did from the beginning. So in their 249-page press packet that the AG's office put out, a lot of what they're actually doing is trying to, take the legs out from under anything Klein said. So they'll say he said, instead of like just their own investigation, it's almost like they're trying to defend themselves against anything that Klein said, which his stuff, actually, most of it was corroborated. And so that Chris Smith that I told you about conceded that you ready for this, guys? So when Philip Klein said, I don't think that would have been Tom driving his vehicle around that night, actually. I think by then something bad had already happened to him. Well, when they hear this, one of those Attorney General investigators says that killers sometimes drive their victims' cars in big cities. It happens in Austin all the time, right? You kill somebody on the east side, you drive that vehicle to North Austin, and you think nothing about it. But in small town Texas, where everybody knows everybody's vehicle, would you kill somebody and drive their vehicle around all night? No. What? What is that even? What?
No. I know a lot of dudes that did a lot of killings, and it was not always like, I'm just going to jump in the car and drive around. People drive cars of the victims when they are in a situation that they got to either get out of or try and stage and make look different.
It could have been an accidental death. I mean, to be fair, they could have gotten in a fight. He could have hit his head on a curb and died, and somebody's trying to get rid of him. Either way, now you got to get his truck somewhere else. But it's just preposterous to say that in the middle of the night in this rural town in pitch black, that a killer wouldn't drive his car around because it's a small town. That's silly. So Nathan Lewis, how do you think he took the Attorney General's announcement? I think he's going to be pretty happy. He said he was relieved. And at the meeting, Rachel Kading had made a point of saying that Nathan Lewis had not conducted an improper investigation into Tom's disappearance. But interestingly enough, on November 15th, 3 months after that Attorney General's meeting, Nathan Lewis resigned from the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office. The sheriff resigned. He was found to have fudged training hours for himself and other deputies, including the antler collector, Pine Gregory, the one who found Tom's remains. He also, Nathan Lewis, had gone back and amended supplements from over a year prior. Gets even better. So now we got sheriffs gone, right? The sheriff, the lead on the case, has resigned. If you don't know, this happens sometimes in departments. Instead of being fired, all right, he was offered a resignation. This wasn't because he took an early retirement, all right. Gets better though. So Pine Gregory, again, the guy who hunts the antlers, who was also a deputy who found Tom's remains. Pine Gregory was then fired from the Hemphill County Sheriff's Office in May of 2019, and this came off the heels of a local attorney, Kyle Miller, who sent a letter to all of the area defense attorneys. Like, quite literally, this one attorney sends out an email to all of the area in Canadian Texas defense attorneys and basically says, do not take any cases that have been investigated that have Pine Gregory's name on it. Like, we will not take any of these. So I'm going to read to you exactly what it says. So the county attorney, Kyle Miller, like I said, sent this letter to area defense attorneys. And his letter, which was dated April 3rd, said he was refusing all cases submitted by Deputy Gregory for prosecution, claiming, quote, factual issues, which cast doubt on the officer's credibility. This attorney added that he had already refused multiple cases submitted by Deputy Gregory for, quote, lack of sufficient probable cause and or for misapplication of the law. So because of this letter that was written, Pine Gregory, the deputy there, was fired. All right. So Tom's remains, they have been in a morgue for all this time. Okay. So they've been sitting there waiting because his mom has fought to have an independent forensic investigation completed. So Tom's dad has fought it this whole time, all these years. There are some people in like certain Reddit rabbit holes that say, why is he fighting it? Is he involved? I really have no reason to think that his father's involved whatsoever if in any of this. It sounds like he actually he had a bad taste for Philip Klein. I told you he's not everybody's cup of tea. He's a very strong personality. But Tom's dad, I think, just wants Tom's body to be buried and wants to be basically, done with this in the sense of being able to mourn his son and move on. But his mom is like, no, I want his body studied more. This doesn't make any sense. And so finally, not long ago, Penny was able to get it signed with the stipulation that the investigator Klein could not be at the autopsy per Tom's father's wishes. And she was fine with that. And then we actually have a public statement made because the initial autopsy, while I trust fully the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, the problem with it is that what we get as the public is the findings of the pathologist with then narration from the Attorney General's office. So that would be like me deciphering a vehicle crash report as a nurse. Like, that's not what I can't, I might can read it and feel like I understand it, but it wouldn't be in anyone's best interest for me to write a narrative on that. But instead you have the Attorney General's office writing a narrative on all the findings of the pathologist with the initial autopsy. And so we do have at every turn, all they seem to want to do, we talk about it all the time, confirmation bias. And at every turn, they just want to show that it's not foul play, which is wild to me. Like, I don't know why. It's wild based on the findings that we have, but it's wild that that's the goal. And I don't really understand it. But when you look at what he had, so when you look at the partial skeletal remains, I won't geek out too much, guys, with this anatomy stuff, but it's interesting if you need to hear what happened with his skull. What did they find with Tom's remains? So when they talk about the maxilla, so that's your upper jaw. Okay. So picture your face, your upper jaw, where your upper teeth are. There was a fracture of the maxillary socket for teeth. So they talk about the teeth, but there's a fracture in this socket. So his face, there is a fracture into the bone in his face. Okay. It says this is consistent with blunt force trauma impact to the anterior. So like the front teeth. But it says, but no determination could be made if this trauma occurred perimortem or early in the postmortem stage. So what they're trying to say is that, we can't determine for sure that this happened before he died or is what caused his death. This could have happened after he died. So the trauma appeared to be from front to back in direction. And so they say that evidence of post-mortem scavenging is unlikely that that's what caused this injury. So basically, he's got a fracture to his face, like his cheek. They go into detail about anatomically where this would be, but just picture a blow to the front of the face, okay? Mm-hmm. So it goes into like his sinuses area, around his orbital socket, that top part of his cheek there. There is a concave fracture. So think of a bat. I don't know. No one said that. There's no evidence of that, but I'm saying picture something, blunt force trauma hitting him. Or what, like a tree limb that fell, because they continue to say this could have happened post-mortem. So actually in the email that I sent to the doctor that conducted this autopsy, these are not his words. Remember, he just gives the actual findings. He doesn't then say, and I think it happened this way. He just does the autopsy. Okay. So I asked him in the email, like, could you please clarify for me in all of the cases that you've covered? And this man has, like I said, a very extensive history with his job. But, how often do you find blunt force trauma induced fractures to a face found in remains of somebody that happened post-mortem? Again, haven't heard back from him. If I were a betting woman, I'd have to say he's going to say that doesn't really happen, right? Like that's not how you get that kind of thing. So we have, again, skeletal damage consistent with blunt force trauma that may have resulted from a single application of force. So anyway, we do know, however, that there were no bullet wounds to at least the bones that were recovered, but they were minimal, right? So we have a skull, a femur, and some small bones, and that's about it. So that's kind of what that initial autopsy said. I told you that Penny, his mom, had been holding out for a second independent autopsy and was finally granted that. And so what happened was, this was with the stipulation per Tom's father that two things, that Philip Klein could not be around, a part of, involved with the second autopsy. They agreed. And that no matter what, the results of the autopsy to be sealed, not for public knowledge. So she agreed, kind of against her better wishes, but she agreed to that. And I say against her better wishes because if things came out to be the way that she anticipated them being, meaning you guys are blaming me for covering up my son's suicide, if these findings are something different, I would like to tell the public precisely that. Yeah. But either way, this is their wording on what happened after this second autopsy. So it says the examination was finally undertaken on April 7th, 2025. You guys, this just happened last month by Texas Tech University Forensic Anthropology Center in Lubbock, Texas. The arrangements were made. So this just kind of goes through the legal jargon of, who agreed to what and how. So it says, we have concluded post-examination of the first report that there is no evidence of a suicide. We believe the theory has no evidence whatsoever, and the Meek family and Tucker Brown, that's Tom's brother, are completely innocent of the baseless and made-up story that Tom Brown killed himself at his house, and then someone put him in his car, dumped most of the contents of his car, including his backpack, on Lake Marvin Road. They're saying it was ridiculous then. It's now even more ridiculous. Furthermore, we have now concluded, after review post-examination from both teams, that this case is considered a homicide with intent. This means that Tom was injured and died from his injuries at the hands of another. So it says, as mandated reporters under the Texas Occupations Code, we have forwarded the report to the Texas Attorney General's office for their review. Furthermore, we have forwarded a copy to the United States Department of Justice, FBI, for their review, again, as mandated by law. So it doesn't show how Tom died. It doesn't, we can't say that, we don't know because the results are sealed, but they've come so far as to say that the results look to be homicide with intent. So all of these, Penny is a liar. She's an emotionless, scary woman, that Sheriff Nathan Lewis was saying about the victim's mother. And, we know that, he was all about, we know Tom ran off with this older man and he had these weird fetishes and he's in Colorado, right? Or, Penny, we know that you know more about this and you moved your son's body because you were ashamed that he had committed suicide, when she freely talks about her father doing it, like it's wild to me. let me just, so you know what their verbiage looks like all the way up to the DA. The last thing I'm going to read you here is exactly what the DA, Franklin McDonough, says. He's the one who, in that secretly recorded meeting that Rachel Kading from the Attorney General's office called, he's the one that toward the end, his voice starts to strain. And like I said, you know, when someone doesn't necessarily fully have confidence in what they're saying, but they're pushed back, like people push back and they kind of just get mad about it. That's kind of what he does. And he says, because of the amount of public interest in this case, the amount of time that has elapsed, and the amount of erroneous information that has circulated around the investigation, we believe it necessary to be open and transparent about the facts in this case. While it is not common practice to disclose evidence in a pending investigation, we believe providing a general synopsis of the known facts in the case will dispel conjecture and provide a thorough explanation for the inevitable but frustrating conclusion that this investigation has reached an impasse. Okay, let me say that again. This investigation has reached an impasse and should be suspended until such time as additional reliable evidence may be discovered. In case you want to read through the weeds of that one, basically they're like, unless you come to me kneeling with a silver platter in your hands with something labeled evidence, we're done here. And I mean, I think that you got nothing different when you called the Attorney General's office and spoke with Rachel Kading.
Yeah, just refer to that, whatever, 218
the
or 249,
the press packet that I read to you guys from some of.
Yeah. So
actually, she also, good job, Skip Hollingsworth, who had that 10-part series, because she actually referred Brian to listen to that guy's podcast.
Oh, yeah.
The investigator from the Attorney General was like, hey, there's a great podcast on the case. And so all he was trying to get from her is to convey, well, what do you mean? It's an investigation or it's suspended? Like, what does it mean to you for it to be suspended? And all she would say is essentially what this letter from the DA says, which is, you know, it's frustrating. We're at an impasse and it's suspended unless new evidence is recovered. But like consistently new evidence has been recovered, as in Tom's belongings at different parts strewn all about this road, Tom's bones, you know, so like, and you want to tell me that it could be natural causes and that we know for a fact without knowing anything else, that there's blunt force trauma to his face, to the boy's face. It was concave, it was caved in. Okay. There's a fracture there. So, you know, just case.
I mean, and there should be, you know, your checklist of shell casing was uploaded, you know, like you would do a fingerprint, just for comparison, because 3 months from now, whenever that firearm could show up, an officer could arrest somebody.
You mean the fact that, like, if you want something to investigate, how about let's track down the firearm that shell casing belongs to, or attempt.
Yeah, that's
outside of saying, Penny, do you guys have these guns in your house? And she says, no, we don't have any 25 caliber. Like, and they're like, okay, done. Well, wasn't his gun.
Who among you has you know, has firearms, would have the 25? You check it ballistically. Like I said, I mean, if you don't come back with a match, you know, in the future somebody gets arrested or house is searched, firearm gets retrieved, firearm gets test fired, it gets uploaded, and boom, you got a match. And then you're back to, just looking, like we talked about, looking at the crime scene, looking at all the facts, it doesn't scream missing person. Maybe it started out as a missing person. It doesn't seem like
for about 2 hours.
Yeah. It seems like it started out as probably 2, maybe 3, whatever, some people hanging out together. And then something happens, and then everybody goes into panic mode, potentially. I don't know.
Well, so Philip Klein will say, so his theory, which again is a theory, but he's not like ruled anything out with this, right? This is just kind of what he's kind of developed in his head as this has gone on, and nothing's ruled this theory out for him either. So he's kind of maintaining it, but it's still, I think, less far-fetched than all of the stuff Nathan Lewis offered up immediately upon Tom's disappearance. And Philip Klein says his phone, the last ping of his phone was at the high school near the stadium. And so his kind of running thought, again, we have nothing necessarily to base this on properly, but is that with that being the case, that kids did gather at the high school, they did gather around the stadium, that he met with, whether it be intentional or unintentional, something. And so kind of an example he gives is that maybe a kid, maybe it was an enemy of his, that's a kid, maybe it was a friend of his being dumb, and somebody's like tries to spook him and, either accidentally or for whatever reason intentionally shoots him. Yes, there was no bullet wound to the skull. That's not the only place you can be shot and die. Okay. So accidentally shoots him, this blood, whatever. And then they freak out and call their parent, who happens to be buddies with the sheriff, who says, "Help me out, buddy," whatever. Now that may be far-fetched. I don't know if the sheriff has anything to do with anything, but it just is bizarre. Think of Summer Wells, who went missing on her property in Tennessee. And immediately the parents are like, she was abducted. Like, go look there. She's not here. She was taken. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that Nathan Lewis is like, he's in Colorado. He's gone. He's gone.
I have to assume that there's somebody in Colorado they followed up with, they talked to, whatever.
Well, it doesn't matter. His body was in town by his truck. So,
but I mean, when you're investigating it and you go, okay, well, you just got to track down last minute anyone saw him, talked to him, got any kind of social media message. So you got social media accounts, you got his phone extractions, his phone locations. But if you throw it out there that he was with some dude in Colorado and then you find a dead body, well, who's this guy in Colorado? Does he have anything to do with it, or was that just...
So interesting too that the last little point here that I'll make is that when Nathan Lewis accused Philip Klein of planting the phone during the search party to, quote, make himself look good, and Klein got so angry about that, then he said, first of all, Nathan Lewis's point was that, well, he didn't tell people where this search was going to take place, so it had to have been him or somebody in his search party, unless the phone was already there because somebody had just tossed it there. Yeah. But then Klein was like, okay, cool. If that's the game we're playing, I emailed all of the volunteers 48 hours before the search. So 48 hours before, every one of the volunteers knew where we were going to search, along with the deputies. Mm-hmm. He's like, so you guys were actually the only people who really knew. Yeah. Outside of the public wasn't. So. Mm-hmm. Right. That's funny, actually. I'm a little sleepy.
No.
Yeah.
Why would you be sleepy?
Oh my gosh. So what do you guys think? Quickly in the chats. Boom, boom, boom. Hit me with it. What do you think?
Good. I can't read all those comments so far. Yeah. Well, we've talked about it. I think it's a prime example of a missing person case going into something different. You see it with people. Sometimes they get overwhelmed or they get over their head in an investigation and they want it to be something simple and they want it to be clear cut. Mm-hmm. And so then that's what they're looking at. That's what they want. They don't want to have to ask more questions or keep digging.
It's harder. Like, the stuff he was coming up with was harder to.
Oh yeah, but I think in his core, if you and I were sitting here talking to him, and he was being 100% honest, I think he would say, "Oh, I was nervous and scared that this was going to be a big case. Like this was going to actually be a murder, going to be something." So he at every turn he's downplaying. I mean, there could be a whole lot of other reasons for that, but I've seen people do it. They take a report. And then it's like you ask them some follow-up questions, and they don't want it to be something that's going to draw attention or whatever, or they feel insecure about investigating something. Mm-hmm. An investigation. It's a larceny of Hubba Bubba, Bubble Yum. It's the exact same thing. You're asking questions. You're following your evidence.
Will you say that again?
What did I say? Hubba Bubba?
Before that.
Bubblicious.
It's a Let's go for it.
Oh, larceny of Hubba Bubba, or Bubba Young,
or
Bubblicious. There was 3, I guess. Yeah. anyway. You just ask questions and you work your evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
Follow up on the Angie Solomon case.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that she was able to bond out. Which is really some huge news because if you're not familiar, anyway, the bond process can be weird, and it kind of was for her in the sense of like, okay, you have to be able to procure the money to bond out, but then once you do, you potentially have to have what's called a source hearing where they go through all of your accounts and show where you obtain the money to then be able to bond out. So she is on house arrest. She has been permitted to attend her daughter's high school graduation.
That's good.
Which is actually pretty huge. I was not thinking that judge would allow it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. She's going to go to Gracie's graduation. And then she is going to be awaiting her initial grand jury will be July 2nd. So we will wait for that. Do you need to follow up on any of the little notes you made throughout the case? Did you want to touch on anything, or have we covered it all?
I think we've covered most of them. Big thing I was going to mention early on, I think you addressed it, was bank account information when you're looking for missing persons or when you start to hear
nothing
where
happened.
they are.
There was zero activity anywhere. Yeah. So that's an update on Angie, and then we are going to be having a big old anniversary party.
Mm-hmm.
So if y'all happen to find yourself in Wilmington, North Carolina in June,
boom,
come on out. We have invited
yes, yeah,
Vanilla Ice and Roseanne Barr. So just throwing that out there. We shall wait now. I will keep you posted.
That might come.
I mean, I really don't see why they won't.
I mean, they knew in advance. What if one of the replies was like, "We would, but you did not invite us early on, early enough for us to make it on our itinerary." I still think the messages you sent them were absolutely incredible.
That's just an invitation.
I know, but it's so thoughtful. And how cool would it be?
That'd be great.
Have Roseanne,
Vanilla Ice. Maybe a Tony Danza.
Forgot about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yo.
Come on, Grab. Get out of the cold of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah, y'all can party with us. So that'll be toward the end of June.
Who's?
Yeah, and our buddy Jesse's going to be playing.
Mm-hmm.
Playing for
everybody
us.
Should go listen to Jesse Stockton right now.
Go listen to Jesse Stockton right now.
Uh-huh.
He's the best. Go give him a follow and tell him we sent you. He did. He played the wedding. He'll play the anniversary. He plays all over town.
He's incredible.
The local legend, and we love him.
I think 3 albums. He's put out 3 albums.
So, well, you guys, we appreciate it. Thanks for coming back to join us again. We try our best to do weekly. Again, this is a really kind of weird, hectic time of year, so there may be a week or two here or there where we have to postpone until the following week, but we will keep you posted. Keep your case, your questions and your requests coming. I love reading those. I love reading what you guys want to hear about, and we'll keep trying to entertain what you guys throw out there at us. So if you want to, you can go follow me on Instagram at Andrea Up Late. You can follow Brian at Brian Sanders Disruptors on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
We each have YouTube channels with those names, and you can go to his website, which is
Disruptors of Brian Sanders.
.com. So that would be his website. That's where you can find about all of his teachings, trainings in person. You can fly him out to you. You can fly out here to see him. You can do them virtually, online, or buy his pre-recorded online classes as well. So check those out. We hope to get some more merch out to you guys pretty soon. We're working on some of that.
Episode tomorrow drops with Bailey Chase.
Oh, yeah. You want to tell them about that briefly?
Yeah. So I got an episode drops tomorrow on YouTube at 10 p.m. because I finally figured out how to do that stuff. But it also is on Spotify, Apple, all of that. But it's Bailey Chase. He's an actor. He was on Branch Conley on Longmire. Apparently, well, I don't want to tell a spoiler, but his character got killed off, and I've had a few people that like, I stopped watching the show when he got killed off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but he was in Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Saving Grace.
Oh yeah, that went on for a while.
Homestead, recent release movie and series. But he's just a fun dude. Like, we had a fun time talking. Jason Bright introduced me to him, and that's how we linked up. But
well, very cool.
Yeah.
So that you said that drops tomorrow?
That drops tomorrow. And then what I'm doing recently, I'm loading up some stuff on YouTube because I've been so way behind. So every night, pretty much around 10 p.m. Eastern, a new video will drop. I say new. Some of them are older episodes, but it's stuff I haven't put on YouTube. And then every Wednesday, episodes are dropping on the Disruptors of Brian Sanders. Potentially next week will be Saddam's favorite guard.
I can't wait for the listeners to hear that one and see what all.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that.
As
you can tell, I was like, I'm very excited about it.
No. That's going to be a great one. I can't wait. I can't wait myself for that one. So, well, you guys, we really appreciate you. So please reach out, stay in contact. We enjoy it. We love talking to you guys, and we always appreciate your support. So definitely, if y'all don't mind to hit those subscribe buttons for both of us and any of the, the likes, the stars, all this silly stuff we have to say to try to kind of keep this moving forward. And I think that's all. Do you have anything else you'd like to
I just
offer
talked
the
way
fun
too
folks?
much at the end, so I'm so sorry.
You didn't at all.
I'm kidding.
Why do you say that? They're going to think I keep you like in a box somewhere.
Joke. Put him in the box. Get him in the box.
Get him in the box.
Hey.
Stupid.
Oh.
Ugh. All right. Would you like to tell the people good night?
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
All right, y'all. We do appreciate you. And until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night, y'all.